So what do you make of writers who claim that they don't read their own reviews?
Well, they're elegant liars, I think, probably. I mean, they don't read their own reviews 17 times, maybe, but they probably read them 12 times. Right?
Well, I think it's important to read reviews because how can you really engage with the world, and how can you pretend to be a novelist if you put out a book and then pretend to ignore what people are saying about it?
Well, exactly.
How can you really do that and have an intellectual honesty?
Well, and it's also just, I mean, this is a that you're all here is a remarkable thing, right? That people care. Writing can be such a solitary thing. So to send a book off into the world, at the end of the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer has this lovely image of sending his book out into the world, where it's going to fly on its own, as it were. And to think that no one's going to notice it is a great tragedy. And so any kind of response, even a vigorous and negative response. I mean, with Governor of the Northern Province, the one review everyone always asks me about is the one that just ripped the book apart. And so this is just of a piece with the work, I think.
Becomes a talking point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, a number of you have come today, and I'd like to give you a chance to ask a couple of questions of Randy. Does anybody wish to ask a question?
I just want to take issue with what you said about a room of your own.
Yes.
The examples you gave were all men, in case you didn't notice.
Virginia Woolf's a woman, I thought.
Yeah, but she probably had kids running around, and women are more attuned to the needs of kids, while men are quite able to ignore
Now,
it.
I can take issue with something you said, but go on. No, I mean, I take your point. And of course, there are fundamental differences, as I full well know with small children, between the life that a woman leads when she's trying to do. My wife wrote her PhD while having children multiply. And so I certainly see the frustration there. But I was simply moving away from kind of the specifically gendered issue into more a sense of, if you want to be a writer, you have to find a way to write. That's all I think I really meant. And I have a baby sling that I wear, just so you know. So very attuned.
Any other questions? Yes, just a second.
I was just wondering, when I saw that you grew up in Oshawa, how you had such detailed knowledge of Sri Lanka. Like, did you speak to your parents? Did you take a few trips? Like, it wasn't the kind of background where you've just been there for 3 weeks and then can write about it. So
Wikipedia is a wonderful thing. No, the answer I think is probably all of the above. I certainly spoke to my parents a lot about it. I did a lot of straightforward book reading. And then I did make a few different trips to Sri Lanka. And it was sort of that combination. But then also, again, if you think of what it means to write a universal story, the fact that my Wisconsin brother-in-law slurping water in a South Bend sink figures in a moment in Dambulla, Sri Lanka in 1939. It's a matter of what you're able to kind of put together as a writer. And I think one of the challenges, I think, there is the burden of wanting to achieve a certain kind of realism without feeling like you're writing a documentary, right? I mean, I didn't write a work of cultural anthropology. Again, I'm hoping you don't learn about Sri Lanka about reading my book as the primary purpose for it. But at the same time, I wanted to achieve a certain kind of verisimilitude. When I went there to read from Governor of the Northern Province of Sri Lanka a few years ago, after it was done, some of the people in the audience were asking what I was going to do next. And I said I was kind of mumbling, and then a rather imposing and very famous Sri Lankan writer said, "I hope you're not going to try to write a novel of Sri Lanka based on 3 weeks here." And I said, no, I'm going to come back for another week later.
Good. Good answer. Well, I'll ask, no other questions. Do we have a few more minutes? Or how
Yeah, certainly. Yes.
Well, I was wondering, and there's certainly room for other questions if you have them. There's a stunning, absolutely unforgettable section in Beggar's Feast. We're in the Second World War, and Sam Kandy finds himself in Colombo, and Lord Mountbatten comes to Sri Lanka to deliver some Italian prisoners of war who are to be kept in Sri Lanka for the duration of the war. But he also tricks Sam Kandy into taking possession of 6 prisoners of war who are not Italian, but who are Ethiopian, who've been brought to Sri Lanka in order to be hidden from public sight by Sam Kandy. He's tricked. He's not told who he's going to be taking charge of, and then he finds himself with 6 Ethiopians in Sri Lanka. Not only are they prisoners of war from Ethiopia, but their mouths have been padlocked because of fears that they might be cannibals. And so it's an outrageously horrific detail, and you spin this out a little bit in the novel. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to hear about this incredible story of Ethiopian prisoners of war being brought into Sri Lanka in the Second World War with their mouths padlocked.
Yeah, and it's one of those elements in this book that, you know, if I had simply imagined that freely, I would probably be a little deranged. But the fact of the matter is, it's based on a historical memory, and it comes from my grandmother remembering in 1940s era Sri Lanka, when Sri Lanka was serving as basically a destination zone for prisoners of war that the Allies were taking from the North African campaign. She remembered seeing, and I heard this from an uncle, she remembered seeing little black men let off a ship with padlocks dangling from their lips. And, you know, when you think about it, this woman has no investment in making up something like this, right? It was just one of those memories that was shared with me in passing on one of my trips to Sri Lanka. And as you can all imagine, it kind of stuck there. But it struck me as far too fantastic. In fact, I was very skeptical of it. And so I did some historical research, and I basically figured out it is plausible. Not the padlocks I can't speak to, but the fact of Ethiopian prisoners of war who would have been part of the Italian contingent in North Africa, given that Ethiopia was an Italian colony at the time, all of it is plausible. All of it makes sense. The timeline makes sense. The padlocks were the strange element in it, and they worked for various reasons, I guess you could say, and so I kept them in.
I see. Yeah.
To corroborate your story, when I was growing up, my ayah told me she was from Mathura.
Another town in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, another town in Sri Lanka. And
Can you speak into the mic so everyone?
And she remembers, she called them Kaperi, that's
Kafirs, right?
or Negroes, in lorries, and everybody would go and hide thinking they were cannibals.
There you go. Could you please tell that to my publisher, who doesn't believe me when I tell them that this has some historical fact?
Can I also add to that? Because I have some relations who are married to people of descendants of, Negro people, and they are now Sri Lankans, of course. And one thing is that they're very good in their music, and they used to play the violin and the drums so beautifully. And I used to watch them, they used to play at the radio Ceylon, which is known at that time. They were excellent musicians, and they, of course, had, odd-looking curly hair.
Yes.
But they were there, and of course, later on, they were accepted in society. But I still remember them being very good musicians and a wonderful company.
Well, and the way that you just described it, I think, is important. This idea that they were there, right? To get to one of your earlier points, Larry, that Sri Lanka isn't Sinhalese and Tamil, Sinhalese and Tamil. That there is this kind of wild array of other peoples from Europe, from Africa, that also compose that nation's identity.
Yeah, I was struck by the multiraciality in the audiences in the literary festival
Yes,
in
exactly.
Sri Lanka. You cover a swath of 100 years of Sri Lankan history, and I respect the fact that as a novelist, you're not about teaching the reader about Sri Lankan history, but nonetheless, all sorts of things are covered as a backdrop to this novel. The business of the workers' struggle to unionize, the Second World War and how it affected Sri Lanka, the independence movement, sort of the ethnic factions in the country and ethnic violence, in the country, some of which affects Sam Kandy very directly. It must have been a challenge to sort of keep that stuff bubbling along and to hold 100 years of Sri Lankan history sort of together inside the life of Sam Kandy. That must have been quite a challenge creatively.
Well, that's why the first version of the novel was 525 pages.
Yeah.
And I think it took that much to get the whole story out. And then I think a lot of what came out in the editing process would have been the kind of historical trace marks, right? You want lived and experienced history rather than historical blocks against which the characters move.
Yeah, that's exactly the stuff that had to come out of my novel on
There you
first
go.
draft too, on second draft too. I understand that totally. Oh, we might make this the
last- yeah,
the
the
last
last.
question, if that's okay.
I wanted to corroborate his statement about that people write novels under very difficult circumstances, write things, publish things. One interesting incident is about a person who was sent to jail during the Second World War, and in his jail he wrote his doctoral thesis, the DSc, on the Weimar Constitution, and later on, when he was released, the British government, Harold Lasky, one of the economists, has referred to him and said he would have been made one of the best Labour prime ministers in UK. So I'm trying to corroborate his statement.
Yes, yes. So if you I have one more quick one, perhaps.
Absolutely.
I see one
Sure,
other person.
of
Yeah.
course.
I just wondered if the American novel Catch-22 had been an influence on you at all, because the idea of madness in daily life that I encounter in your novel reminds me of Joseph Heller.
No,
can
not
wave
not
that around.
not consciously. Yes, yes. More William Faulkner's Absalom, I would say. But no, Heller. Heller wasn't there. But one of the things that I found interesting in reading the reviews of the novel, which I've only read 12 times rather than 17 each, would be some of the writers that other critics are comparing the book to, and repeatedly it's been compared to the Great Gatsby, and that wasn't in my head at all when I was writing. But then afterwards, I thought, well, of course, yes, this is perfect sense. I completely agree. But it's remarkable how a writer can be, how the trace marks of your own reading can be revealed, not in the act of writing, but in fact in the act of reading someone else talking about what you've written.
I think more of As I Lay Dying for Faulkner as an influence because of the black humor in it.
Yes, yeah, well, that's another of my favorite Faulkner novels for sure.
Thank you so much, Randy.
Well, thank you, Larry, for the interview. It was very generous. Thank you very much, everyone.